Welcome back to Belong Here, our series at Advanced Native Political Leadership, where we talk with leaders throughout Indian country on topics and work building political power. That includes educating our public on positions that impact our lives. I want to extend a warm náay, daga, and hello, my relatives, to all of our new viewers and guests. We know we have a lot of new folks coming and joining us at this time, so welcome to our series. Recently, we saw hearings for the nominee to be Secretary of the Department of Interior, and perhaps for the first time, this position drew an incredible audience from major media and the general public. And for the first time in 240 years, the nominee is an Indigenous woman. Congresswoman Deb Haaland made history with her nomination, and people are paying attention. During the hearing, we heard a lot about public lands, and specifically a senator from Alaska made it pretty clear that public lands and Indigenous people, Alaska Natives, have a pretty significant relationship with the Department of Interior. Alaska is a special place, and we may have heard that you can see Russia from Alaska, but you don't know a lot about the structure and relationship between Alaska Natives and the United States. For those of us who are American Indians, also treaty federally recognized tribal nations, many of our treaties were written, some before the US was even a country, between our sovereign nations. Alaska didn't become a state until January 3rd, 1959, after the Alaska Statehood Act of 1958. Alaska became a state which included 229 federally recognized tribal nations, which is an estimated 140,000 people who tie this land, this place, back to when Raven made the world and Crow brought daylight to the land. When we think of our Alaska Native relatives, a story of endurance, ways of surviving and thriving in challenging environments, we're not taught that our Alaska Native relatives survived enslavement, disease during the Russian and US trade eras, adapting to statehood, and the fight to restore rights and establish sovereignty. We have a lot to learn, and I encourage you to take a deep dive with us over the next hour to be good relatives, to listen, and to learn. A couple of my friends are joining us from First Alaskans Institute, and a couple of their friends from the great state of Alaska. I want to introduce Elizabeth Lagunai, Medicine Crow, from our Haida and Tlingit nations. She's the president and CEO of First Alaskans Institute. We also have Barbara Wáahlaal Gíidaak Blake, also Haida and Tlingit, and Ahtna Athabascan. She serves as the Alaska Native Policy Center Director. Then we have Joel Jackson, our Haida and Tlingit tribal president of the Organized Village of Kake, and Ben Stevens, Koyukon, Director of Hunting and Fishing Task Force with the Tanana Chiefs Conference. Welcome guests. Thank you for being with us today. And I just love First Alaskans Institute's acknowledgement that we know we are responsible for carrying more than 10,000 years of ancestral knowledge into the future with rigor, humor, resilience, vigilance, and love, and the vision that is progress for the next 10,000 years. So thank you all for making time during your day with us. Can you tell me more about who you are and your work?
Yeah, Prairie Rose. Yes, my name is Lagunai. I am both Haida and Tlingit. On my Tlingit side, I am Kach'adi, freshwater mark sockeye salmon. And on my Haida side, I am Chichgitne. Our crest is the hummingbird. Our family comes from Haida Gwaii through Hiktahunlai or Heidelberg, and then here at home in Tlingit and Tlingit homelands in Koyukon. And I've worked with First Alaskans Institute now for about 13 or 14 years. I probably need to do the math, but I haven't yet. And we work statewide. We're both a 501c3 and also we're an operating foundation. And as you described, our work is really about ensuring that it's our people who are leading the decisions that shape the future. And we do that by relying on the compass that our ancestors set for us. And so it's an honor to be here with you, for making space. We want to make sure that our relatives across the country have a chance to get to better know and understand the way that Alaska is set up. A lot of folks don't really get a chance to know what that looks like. As a result, it does kind of cause confusion. It may cause also this divide and conquer colonial tool to continue to operate and thrive, and we want to see the end of that. So we really appreciate you carving out time for us on your forum here. And of course, as a sister in this work, we just really love doing whatever you guys want us to do with you. So I also want to thank my Uncle Joel and Ben for joining us so that they can contribute to this conversation as we continue to help make sure that folks have a chance to hear from our people who are doing really incredible work and are the experts of our lived experience and the understanding of what it means to work on behalf of our people through the complex systems of governance that we have in Alaska. So complex that even sometimes our own people have a hard time trying to figure it out. So again, Wáahlaal Gíidaak, did you want to say anything?
Good day to everybody. My name is Wáahlaal Gíidaak, as you said, or Barbara Blake. My family is originally from Hiktahunglai or Heidelberg, as well as Klawock. My father's people are from Chestachina, the Ahtna people. I am the daughter of the Nilchin, or the Sky Clan. I am also the granddaughter of the Tlingit, the Dog Salmon people, and my clan is Yakjanos, Raven from the Shark House from Hiktahunglai. It's an honor to be with all of you. As was said, I work for the Alaska Native Policy Center within First Alaskans Institute, where I like to see my role is really just making space and making room for the voices and the great wisdom of our people to be front and center in all decision making. Working with a lot of our, which means working with a lot of our communities and a lot of our non-native folks who live here in the ways and learning the ways of racial equity and what that really means for our Alaska Native people. Working through truth, racial healing, and transformation as a statewide endeavor, so we can finally have a space to speak our truths, wrap that with some healing, and then also work on transformation of systems and institutions so that our people are no longer being harmed. And then, of course, as was one of the reasons we're here today is protecting our ways of life and the good work that goes into just convening a space for our people to use their good thinking and contribute to one another to identify good, solid solutions to help advance our ways of life. And I will pass it over to Uncle Joel to introduce himself.
Yes. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is Joel Jackson. I've been the tribal president for going on 3 years now. I grew up here in Koyukon, the land of my ancestors. And I do a lot of different things for our little community here, mainly trying to protect our way of life with the protecting the Tongass National Forest, which is very important to us, and work with a number of different groups, one of them being the First Alaskans Institute. They've been a big help in our fight for our way of life. And I'm happy to be here today, and I appreciate you inviting us to this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I also would like to say basi to you and to our friends for allowing us a moment and to join you and hear and learn. My name is Ben Stevens. I am from Stevens Village, which is a small village on the Yukon River north of Fairbanks. Growing up, they called me Diniscoots, my grandma. Later in life, she changed my name to Machine Swatik. Basically, I make her think ahead. So I am Dinyit Wutana. We are the people of the canyon, or the mouth of the canyon, where the Yukon Flats flows into the canyon of the Yukon River and makes its way toward the Bering Sea. I live and work in Fairbanks. I work for the Tanana Chiefs Conference, and I help them with the Hunting and Fishing Task Force, which is designed to help our people to advocate for themselves, basically illuminating the establishment that currently exists that does not necessarily help our people thrive. And so our one of the core tenets of the task force is basically reestablishing that connection between our people and the land and the animals, and helping them understand and navigate the language of regulation, and how to change those regulations to help them and not prohibit or inhibit them from accessing wellness. And the Tanana Chiefs Conference basically covers about 235,000 square miles of interior Alaska, from the border to the east, all the way west toward the Bering Sea to within about 50 miles. So that's a huge area. And we've got some 40-ish communities there where our tribal members reside. So that's kind of who I am.
It's an incredible amount of land you're all protecting and calling a place from. I love that we can bring like memory of place into these conversations, because I feel that's something that's often missing within our governance structures. They're very colonized. But I want to ask you a question about the structure for Alaska Natives as it's different from American Indians. And I use American Indian Alaska Natives just because that's kind of how the government tracks a lot of us. You know, Alaska didn't become a state until January 3rd, 1959, after the Alaska Statehood Act of 1958. And I'm curious, like, what role did that change play on the lives of Alaska Natives? I mean, you're speaking to some of them already significantly, changes with hunting and fishing. But can you also share some of those distinctions and the challenges and opportunities that may differ from the tribes in the lower 48?
Yeah, I'll jump in just to start really quickly and just say this. Alaska's statehood really didn't have much impact on our tribal government structures, because of course our tribal governments are modern manifestations of the inherent sovereignty and structures of our people that pre-exist contact, that pre-exist the United States, and that certainly pre-exist Alaska. And so statehood was not a significant factor in shaping anything to do with Native people, other than it was just yet another mechanism that was designed to try to dislodge us from our ownership, or that's such a Western word, ownership, but dislodge us from our homelands and take away our right to have a voice and decision-making authority over our homelands, and enter yet another entity to try to claim space and take from us what was rightfully ours. And so I would just kind of say, to start the conversation, perhaps we go back further in time to talk a little bit about our tribal government structures. And I would say maybe Uncle Joel, do you want to talk a little bit about Organized Village of Kake as a good example of a tribal government in Alaska in terms of size, structure, and the way that it's set up?
Sure. Organized Village of Kake is a very small organization. We have been active since the what the heck was it, I can't even remember now, sorry, but we've been active for quite a while. We have many different programs that we have. We have over 30 employees right now. Everything from social services to natural resources. We have a tribal court that has been put in place. We still have to activate it. It's more of a restorative justice type of tribal court. So we're pretty active in our community. We provide so many services for our people. It's been quite the challenge to navigate a lot of the things that have went on since this COVID started. Working with the guidelines of the funds that we got, but we've done it pretty well, I think, and we continue to operate out of office. Our tribal office has been locked down. Everybody working from home right now for the most part, and yeah, it's been a challenging time.
Yeah, Ganesh Chish, Uncle. I would say too that, you know, the Organized Village of Kake is also something that we might call an IRA form of government. And although our people, of course, have been here for thousands of years, the mechanism of the government to government relationship with the federal government is a little bit different than how you might see it show up down south because of the things that have happened here. And so our tribal government, how many citizens are there in the OVK these days, Uncle?
Sorry, I'm still trying to navigate this thing. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
There's over 500. There's about 500 tribal citizens in our community, and I think we're close to about 1,200 on overall. We have about 500 active tribal citizens, and then there's the inactive role. That means they live away from our community. So it's about 1,200, I believe.
Yeah, there's Chief, Uncle. And so the tribal government really serves as a place of protecting our inherent sovereignty, our tribal authority, to provide and take care of each other. And one of the things that I really appreciate about our tribe is it really is focused on taking care of the whole community here in Kake. So that what Uncle Joel shared is a really, you know, it's a really good picture of how a lot of the tribes in Alaska are structured. Although everybody might have a little bit of a different, some have a traditional council structure, and some might be a little smaller or bigger. Ours is just around the average size of a village in Alaska is about 300 people. So Kake's population is around just about 600 or so. So we're a little bit bigger than the average. But then Ben, I was hoping you could share a little bit about the structure of Tanana Chiefs Conference and how it's different than, say, a tribal government here in Alaska. You're on mute, Ben.
Yep, muted.
I've got just a really bad habit of doing that. Sorry about that. So in general terms, I don't want to get too much in detail about the Tanana Chiefs Conference, but basically TCC is a tribal consortium of all of the tribes in that huge area I mentioned before, and it is a state chartered nonprofit organization. The organization itself is led by all of the tribal leaders from the area that we serve. And so, for example, the place where I'm from, Stevens Village, that tribally elected chief would be the board member that sits at the table for Tanana Chiefs and helps guide their activities, our activities. And so we have a huge board. It's broken down in big regions. So we've got 6 different regions that cover the massive interior. And that is essentially how we get our direction. But yeah, so in my type of a situation here, Joe would come to my boardroom and he'd tell me which way to go and what to do. Is that too simple of an overview?
I don't think
No,
so.
that's
I mean, we have similar setup down here too with some of our regions. Like I'm in the region of the Great Plains. You know, we have the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association, which is very similar makeup of elected tribal leaders who go. And I feel, and it might be similar to yours as well, they still have their autonomy as tribal nations here, but what I see that particular group or groups like that here doing is working more towards like federal policy and advocacy at the federal level for various moves, whether it's healthcare, you know, governance structures or not governance structures, excuse me, education and infrastructure needs. I see those bodies doing that type of organizing more and conversations at this level.
Well, and the thing that is different too in this is that Tanana Chiefs Conference not only operates and provides services on the ground in the communities by way of the tribal authority that was given to them, like Ben was just saying, to provide those services on behalf of the tribes who authorized it. They do also do advocacy in federal and state areas. But they also run and operate their own Alaska Tribal Health system within the region. So the consortium he's working for is actually on the ground providers of services that they do through the inherent sovereignty of the tribes that have authorized their creation. And then is there anything else, Wáahlaal Gíidaak, that you would want to add just to kind of give a little bit more before we jump into some of the other questions Prairie Rose has?
Yeah, just in the statehood question in itself, you know, when we're talking about what was written into our Constitution, there was an equalization or a recognition that no one group could be placed above another, or no one entity or person, I should say, can be placed above another. And so constantly being mistaken for a racial provision within the state of Alaska are our tribes and the tribal rights. So rather than recognize the legal rights that tribes have and the inherent authority that tribes have, our state constitution instead decides to put those rights in a racial category. And so then they can use the constitution of the state of Alaska against our people and say, no, we cannot put your rights above another person's rights, because even if you are Alaska Native, rather than looking at it as a tribal right and the right of a tribal citizen. So it's a constant placement of our people in a racial category versus a political category, which we know is often a mistake of a lot of different people, but it's almost the backstopper behind every argument the state brings to our tribes. And our tribes are still being sued by the state of Alaska at a rate higher than any other state in our nation. And so it's a constant, and it's something that really hasn't shifted a whole lot since statehood.
Do you think Alaska Natives will find justice in like our federal court systems when it comes to issues like that?
You
Just
couldn't
wanna-
have asked a better question.
So usually what happens is those challenges by the state of Alaska will end up in state court, and then they usually end up in federal court, and tribes almost always win. And so it always rises to the federal level, and guess who gets to pay for the legal fees on all of that? It's not our people and it's not our tribes. So the state is constantly losing a lot of money trying to challenge our tribal rights and the rights of our tribes.
Prairie Rose, your question though actually gets to something that one of the reasons I was hoping that President Jackson, my Uncle Joel, and Ben would actually share about is that question you just asked, because we're actually tied up in litigation right now around the ability to protect our ways of life. And that was led through a government to government process that Organized Village of Kake initiated at the beginning of the pandemic, and that others up in Ben's region were also part of, to try to ensure that using their sovereignty around food, and then during the pandemic, really thinking about those food security issues, the panic buying, the panic hunting and gathering that everyone started to do in the cities, and it's already hard enough for our small communities to get groceries flown in, barged in. And so of course, our tribes, they're there to take care of us. That's how we are. We take care of each other. That's our community. So our tribe really started working on that. And that ended up in a lawsuit that's ongoing right now. And so maybe Uncle Joel and Ben, you guys could share a little bit about that process with the Federal Subsistence Board and how we ended up in court and where things are.
Okay, I can go. When this pandemic started, we had a shortage of meat in our small communities. So I immediately thought of why are we dependent on the store when we have so much wildlife around our small communities? So I immediately took it to the Fish and Game to ask for out of season hunt for moose and deer, and they denied that. And so I went to the region or district rangers in Petersburg for the Forest Service, and he said he didn't have the authority. So I went to the regional forester in Juneau, and he said he'd work with me to get a hunt on the Forest Service lands. And the next day I got a call from the subsistence forest person in Anchorage, which took me to the Federal Subsistence Board. And they had 4 days of meetings, which I was able to call in for 3 of those days and let them know what the community of Kake needed, and which was fresh meat. And I had some other community members call in, and all right up to the last day we're calling in, trying to make our case on a special action request, and then they couldn't reach a decision, so they moved the meeting until Monday, and reached Monday came around, and I made our case again about getting some fresh meat to our community members, because the meat that we get from the store is processed meat, and that's not to say it's not good. It's just not the best meat that we can get, and the best meat we could get was right off our lands around us, which was deer and moose. So they okayed that, and it went to the Department of Interior, and Department of Interior hummed and hawed about it, and they sent it down to the district ranger's office in Petersburg, the Forest Service, and and then the district ranger had to contact the mass care unit for the state, because we're in a pandemic, and they couldn't find any reason why to grant us this special action request. So went back to the Federal Subsistence Board, and they instructed the district ranger in Petersburg to work with us. And we got our special action request on for 2 moose and 5 deer. It took a total of 3 months to get this whole process worked through. And then after we did our first hunt, that's when the state sued the Federal Subsistence Board. The Organized Village of Kake was named in that lawsuit, as well as my name was used. So took it to our council and said, well, we better file a lawsuit against the state, in support of the Federal Subsistence Board. And the judge ruled in our favor, as well as the Federal Subsistence Board's favor too. And that's where it is now. So it was a long process.
Yeah, the bureaucracy alone, and then to have it in favor, and then the complications from that, that's incredible. And I'm actually really proud that you're leveraging your sovereignty to support a government entity who saw the need and saw that there was the time to do that now, even though it took 3 months to do it.
Uncle Joel finished? Thank you, Uncle Joel.
Yeah.
Our situation, we were looking at pretty much the same situation from slightly different angles. And when the pandemic restrictions all of a sudden blew up all around us, as was mentioned before, there was panic buying, and people were leaving all of the essentials, but taking the toilet paper, and it was a crazy nightmare. But up here in Alaska, things are just a little bit different. There's a huge reliance upon freighting, infrastructure, moving goods and services back and forth from rural areas to the urban areas and so forth. And as soon as the restrictions were imposed, even the shelves in the cities were starting to empty. But it really hit our rural communities very hard. Things out there in the rural communities are extraordinarily expensive. A gallon of fuel can run you $12.50. A gallon of milk. The last time I checked, I did this about 7, 8, 10 years ago, and a gallon of milk was about $11, $12. And so it's extraordinarily difficult to be able to feed your families from what you get out of that store. And no disrespect whatsoever to all the Alaskans out there running stores, but it's just what it is for us. And so our folks were basically forced to find food other ways, and a lot of our folks kind of leaned further toward our traditional ways of harvesting from the land. And in short order, we were faced with all of the regulations and policies imposed by the state of Alaska and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And basically every single one of those things said, no, you can't, emergency or not, you can't go out there and harvest another deer or moose or caribou. And that's what basically the nonsensical part of that situation started to emerge. And that's when we started to dive deeper into the rules, regulations. And Joe mentioned some of the quagmire that we had to navigate just to get to the point where we requested from the state of Alaska permission. Ask, may we please harvest another moose? And they just blatantly said no. Now, what are our folks supposed to do? So, so needless to say, this is another example of how we're starting to embrace the system and learn the language of regulation and learn the bureaucracy and basically take more control back over to where we can do our jobs of taking care of the people and making sure that there is wellness involved, getting our people back involved, connected to the land and the animals. And I tell you, the layers of bureaucracy and confusing regulations is enough to stifle most everyone. And so part of the things that we're doing is trying to help our folks navigate that foreign system that has been imposed by the newly minted Alaska State Constitution, a constitution that didn't necessarily take into account tribes.
Yeah.
In fact, the state of Alaska denied that there were tribes in Alaska until recently. And so that could reflect a little bit upon what I think we were talking about earlier, that they're suing us at every step that they can find a foothold. And like was mentioned, fortunately, there are clearer minds out there. And what we have to do is we just have to keep presenting the right, the just, the equity to these rational thinking folks. And I think that's going to be a huge step in helping us help our people. So it was a mess, and I'm so thankful that our advocacy effort met up with First Alaskans and Uncle Joe and all of the other folks around the state of Alaska that were all trying to figure out that wall of regulation that they had to get through to take care of their people. And so I am grateful for Uncle Joe and First Alaskans for allowing us to be within your air. Bless you for that, please.
Thank you.
I
I think about the work that you do at First Alaskans Institute and engaging in the tribal communities, not just around the knowledge that we hold within tribal communities, but then again, this civic participation outside of those tribal governments. And I had a question related to the expectations around Alaska Natives to shape the political future of Alaska. Is that something that is a movement that's visible? Are you starting to see more and more get engaged because they're running up against these bureaucratic walls and seeing the lawsuits happen just almost frivolously in a way that will protect that knowledge and bring that memory into those places of government and start shaping the political future of Alaska? What are you seeing, and what can you share with us?
Yeah, for the question, Prairie Rose. I just wanted to clarify too that when Ben was talking about the rational people and all of this, I just wanted to make sure everyone knew he was talking about the Native people. And that the system that that Uncle Joel and Ben were just describing is a direct product of ongoing and continued systemic inequities between the federal government and the state government, that we are criminalized under both sets of those governments' laws for being Native. Because in order to be Native and who we are, it means we have to get out on our land and hunt, fish, and gather to be able to take care of our communities. But it's also a place of our spiritual health, our education, our science. It is who we are, and one cannot be without the other. And so they were just giving you a good description of one of our major areas of confusion, and that continues to be a challenge for our people, is that these two systems of these foreign governments operating on our homelands, their systems are bifurcated. And so Uncle Joel, Ben, our tribal governments who have been working so hard during this COVID pandemic to protect us, you know, using their sovereignty to blockade roads, using their sovereignty to get food into people's homes so they could be, their immune systems could be boosted. Our tribal health system is so good. They're vaccinating everybody, not just tribal beneficiaries now, because the state hasn't been able to do it as efficiently or as well. You know, so there's these things that have happened here that continue to be these huge areas of inequity, both inequity in terms of our racial status as Native people, but also here you see that there's a relegation of some sort of lesser sovereignty that the state and the federal government both have really failed to understand. And so their description of that litigation is important because, you know, we don't have to ask anyone to go out and hunt and fish. These are our homelands, but they use a respectful government to government process to try to help teach these other governments how to work with other people and how to work together. And so one of the things that I really love and appreciate about the leadership of our tribal governments is that they set the higher standard of what it means to be a government, of taking care of people, and not just have jurisdictional fighting matches, but actually taking care of their people. And when we talk about political power for our people, Alaska Natives make up over 20% of this overall state population. And in a recent political article talking about what was appearing to be a shakeup of Senator Murkowski. I think you guys may have all seen that article, and about, this is before the vote, about how she might vote. And it talked about how Alaska Natives have the highest voting population in any state, of any state. And we have the highest number of voting eligible Native people. And so when we think about who do we hold up as mentors, as guideposts, as people who set a standard for how to care for our people, we can look to our tribal governments. We can look to our tribal consortiums. We can look to our Native people. And so that's actually how we designed our civic engagement trainings, to help people who are thinking about at some point they might want to run for office. And so what we do is we center the who you are as a Native person connected directly to why you might run. Because we don't need to elect more people who don't get that. Mm-hmm. You know, we need people who understand your responsibility to your community. Running for tribal government is critical. Running for state government, federal government, city governments. But do it knowing who you are as a Native person, so that that knowledge, that ancient ancestral knowledge, can actually be put to work in helping to protect your communities, helping to feed your people. I wish I could remember the quote, but we held a Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Tribunal recently, and one of the folks who provided testimony talked about, you know, hunger knows no law. But he said, we're not just talking about the hunger in your belly. We're talking about the hunger of spirit, the hunger of your emotional and physical needs, and your spiritual needs. And to us as Native people, that's what protecting our ways of life is about. Mm-hmm. So let's put those in the center of why we want to run. And let's have a conversation about how you as a Native person have the honor to be able to hold up these things as you step into areas where you might run for an elected position. And so those are some of the ways that we think about how can we continue to get more people involved in those processes. Wáahlaal Gíidaak might have some ideas about that too.
I just want to share a couple of examples where we're kind of intervening or have seen a shakeup of how the system might or could potentially be impacted moving forward. One is the ranked choice voting ballot initiative that recently passed this last voting session. And we know that ranked choice voting is not a perfect system. And we know that it's something that needs improvement. But we also saw it as something that has the potential to increase the number of representatives who work in our legislature by, it could be upwards of 16 to 18% of our people like sitting in seats in the legislature. And we sat back and we looked at the 6 people who are now in our state legislature, the 6 Native people, and who often find themselves isolated and who need the support of our whole community behind them, which we rally behind them. But if we were able to bump that number to 16 to 18 individuals sitting in leadership roles in our state legislature, what would that do? What shifts would we see on a scale of our tribes, of our Alaska Native people, of our Alaska Native entities, of a form of equity that is balanced, that is more representative of the state of Alaska? And so we got behind that system in terms of the change and shift we wanted to see. Another one that we're really strongly in the position of is the redistricting. And we'll be heavily involved in that moving forward, because the last time we saw a shift of our legislature reduce the number of representatives. I think we lost 4, and I'm going to stop now and let Locke carry on.
We all know that. We are all living at home, trying to work out of our homes, so we totally get that. I was just saying, you know, when Wáahlaal Gíidaak was sharing that it's so inconceivable to us. It's so inconceivable to us. And by us, I mean all of Alaska, to say that we could have equitable representation in our state legislature, because that seems so like, you know, for other Alaskans to be like, what do you mean you'd get 16% of the legislature? You know what I mean? It's like you do realize that's actually what equitable representation means, you know, and we're over 20% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never had equitable representation.
I'd be really curious.
Yeah, go ahead.
I said I'd be really curious to see what parity in Alaska would look like for Alaska Natives in that government structure. You know, how many elected seats are there in the state of Alaska with a population of, I think your population is actually really similar to my population in North Dakota, around 700, just under 800,000 or so. Your land base is like way bigger than ours, but to have parity in your state government would I think you can do it. I really do, with at least with your state legislature right away. I see other states getting up there with more Native electeds, and what that does, not just creating the support system that Wáahlaal Gíidaak was talking about for those elected leaders, but showing that self-viability that young people, you too can run for office and you could be a representative of this place. Because we talk often with some of our trainings that our elected leaders are often like holding the line so we don't lose anything anymore, right? They're holding the line and maybe doing some incremental changes because small is safe, right? But once you get to that level where the actions can be bolder, that just blows. I'm just like getting goosebumps just thinking about like the representation and the work that comes with that can do for Alaska Natives in governments. Oh man, y'all, the time is getting away from us. feel like we're just getting started too. But there's so much we want to talk about, and I want to thank you all for not just connecting dots first, but contextualizing your lived experience with us. It's meaningful engagement for us to learn from you. There's so many questions I want to ask, but there's one I think of just because Google made a thing recently. I know I'm kind of changing the pace a little bit, but when I think of Alaska Natives and the impact that has happened on the political world and the rights of Indigenous people, I think right away of Elizabeth Peratrovich, who was raised with blatant racism, with signs in public spaces that read "No Natives Allowed," "No Dogs, No Indians." Like that was my dad's experience too. But her will to change, saying Alaska Natives have been here forever. As Indigenous people, we've been here forever. I'm going to fight for this place because it's my place to be, right? And her testimony was crucial to passing the anti-discrimination bill, and the movement that she was a part of has just had significant impact on all of our lives as Indigenous people and people of color in this country. But I wanted to ask you, I think this is maybe a good way to close out, and feel free to add whatever else you want to add as we close out today, what you want us to know of your own lived experience. And if you want to answer my question, totally cool. But I want to know, who are your heroes, and what makes them heroes in your lives? What characteristics make them relevant to your life and lived experience? You're muted.
Man, that's a tough one. I have so many. Can I just say all our ancestors? And Elizabeth Peratrovich is one of them. There is actually a meme circulating that a friend made that it says Tlingit Civil War, and it's like, do you say Peratrovich or do you say Peratrovich? Because everyone's like, which way is it? But you referred to the Google Doodle of her, and we just celebrated Elizabeth Peratrovich Day, which is February 16th, and the Alaska Native Brotherhood and the Alaska Native Sisterhood, which we see as grandparents. These are grandparent organizations who formed in the early 1900s, like the early 1900s, to fight for our civil rights. Mm-hmm. And to be civically engaged in the protecting of who we are. And Elizabeth was the grand president of the Alaska Native Sisterhood, along with her husband, Frank Peratrovich. And they were seminal and pivotal people, but they didn't do it alone. They were the kind of people who led with everyone else, and that this movement, this place, belonged to all of us. And there's so many incredible leaders who are part of that, and who we are the children of and the grandchildren of. And so we get to carry their legacy forward and try to make sure that their hard work continues to bear fruit through us, and then hopefully through our future generations. So I'll just say I'm going to claim all of the ancestors, so no one else gets to claim them. But Kanishchishawa for the question.
That's a really hard one. Yeah, I like that all of the ancestors. Giving specificity to it is a dangerous road to travel down, especially with our extensive Native families that we have. I do want to uplift the names of Byron Malott, Valerie Davidson, Albert Kukesh, Elizabeth Medicine Crow, as some of the more influential people who have constantly been there in my my space and sphere as mentors, as people to look up to, as unapologetically Native people in any space, whether it be state government space, whether it be federal government space, international spaces sometimes, and really claiming that space, reclaiming that space in the name of our ancestors. And I'm so thankful for all of them and the guidance that they continue to imbue in, is that the right word? Embed in my life. And I'm so thankful for that. And Laguna, you said Seminole and you used it as a word. And I was like, they weren't Seminole, they were Tlingit.
Oh, funny.
Ben or Joel?
Yeah, I'd like to express my, I grew up with many great leaders in our communities, and some of them, like Elizabeth had mentioned, our ancestors that I never knew, but I heard of them. But most recent ones was my eldest cousin, Clarence Jackson Sr. He was a very strong leader for our Native community. Heard Byron Malot's name mentioned. I grew up listening to those people and many others, and continues on today. I'm very proud of my niece, Elizabeth Medicine Crow. She has been instrumental in putting together a lot of these things, as well as her staff from First Alaskans Institute, putting us out there as tribal leaders. I think the biggest influence in my life, though, was my father, Thomas Jackson Sr. He had a strong voice no matter where he spoke, as well as my grandfathers, Johnny C. Jackson, Scotty Jackson. They're very strong people, very strong men, as well as my grandmothers and my aunties. They're the ones that formed how I am today. They instilled the need to help our people, to make sure that our people are safe, to make sure our way of life is still intact after 10,000 years. We still hunt and gather in our ancestral homelands. And that's so important that we protect it for future generations to come, not just 1, 2, 7 generations down the line. We need to make sure it's protected, that we still have what we have now that we rely so much on living off the land and teaching our younger people how to do that, as it was taught to me growing up. So it's very important that we get more people involved. I know we have some very strong young leaders coming up. I'm proud of them. One of them is our grandson, Shawan Jackson Gamble. He's been working very hard, going to school. He's working in the legislature as an aide. So, I feel confident moving into the future that we have people like him. Also, another young man by the name of Simon Friday, who's been doing some very good work. So, as well as everybody else that's that's working on the sidelines to support these young men. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, real briefly, I think that the first person that comes to mind when I think of heroes is my grandma. She's the one that raised me, and she taught me some pretty important things like kindness and love. And then I wouldn't be anybody if it wasn't for my grandpas and my uncles that taught me my job. And what we do as Native men is to help feed the people and protect the weak. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you know what? The work that we do is so damn hard, and it takes so much strength. And there's no way that we could do it without the strength of our ancestors. And so when I get tired and I feel like falling down, I think about what they had to do to get us here. And so it all goes to them. And I think those folks are the ones that can be mentioned right now. There's so many more. Lago and I just mentioned that we just experienced Elizabeth Baratovich Day. And it was during that time somebody walked up to me and said, you know, what do you think of this day? And I was like, that's my hero. And I said, I wouldn't do what I do today if I didn't see that. And so, yeah, Elizabeth is right up there too. So we walk on a trail that they laid down for us. So
I am so grateful that you all carved out time in your day to share with us, to help us be, better relatives, to listen and to learn with one another. I give you blessings on your strength and your courage to continue to do the work that you do, as we know that it isn't easy to fight this design. It took intention to create the systems that we're working in. And we are here by design within these government structures, and these governments and policies towards Indigenous people in this country were designed to have every failure for us. Our ancestors didn't want us to fail. And that's what we bring into this space. So thank you for the reminder, for bringing them into this space with us and into this dialogue. And I really look forward to when we can gather again. I just got my first dose of my vaccine, and I know Alaska Natives are getting vaccinated in record numbers because your systems are prepared and equipped to care for a community because of your ancestors and your leadership as Indigenous people. Thank you for leading, and thank you for showing us that there's other ways of being and bringing that space forward. But we got to close today, so I look forward to when we can talk again. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our guests, and catch us on the next episode with Advanced Native Political Leadership.
Chiefs, how
Thank you. Have a good evening.